Where do you see the biggest problem in team building for making this happen?
I think one of the big challenges for us and for all like hardware companies is that, for the first 6 months, it's like the hardware, the limiting factor.
How have you been thinking about manufacturing of the robot?
I mean, again, this is one of those like big engineering trade-off decisions. And like we've made decisions early on that our priority was going to be building one robot that works before we before we start to scale up.
What is the advice that you'd give to a first-time robotics or construction tech or simply hardware founder that's approaching a really hard problem to build?
I have an answer. Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to be hard, but it's really going to be hard. And I think it's really important to surround yourself.
Hey everyone, and welcome to BitBuilders, where we sit down with the greatest minds building and exploring robotics in construction and space. Before we get started though, if you're a startup founder or operator responsible for innovation in your company, or you want a deeper, more insightful look into technology in AEC, you won't want to miss our newsletter. From deep dives into particular technologies such as AI, robotics, design, software, and so on. Hot takes from investors betting big in AEC technology and advice on building tech companies, including the stories and takeaways of the most successful AEC technology founders. Head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today to get this exclusive material straight to your inbox. And now for the episode.
Hi, Dylan. Hi, Andy. Welcome on BitBuilders.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah,
Awesome to have you here, guys. So for the audience that doesn't know this, you guys are both speaking from your office at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, visited you this year, and in your lab was a lot of fun. You gave me a great tour. One of the best visits ever, and I loved seeing your robot in action. And I wanted to get you on the pod, but I want to introduce you guys, but I think you can do it better yourself. So, one at a time, you choose who goes first. Why don't you tell us, who you are, and that's it. And what's your role in Renovate?
Yeah. So I'm Andy Stoltz. I'm, one of the founders and the CEO here at Renovate. My background is all robotics and automation. I've been doing this for, about 14 years at this point. Started in the aerospace industry, building like big machine tools that build, fuselage, wing structures for Boeing, Airbus. And then have also been at a couple early stage startups. I come from a big construction family. And so my dad ran a GC growing up. I've got cousins and uncles that are in all the trades. And so this company that we're building now, Renovate, kind of merges these two worlds for me, robotics and construction.
So you didn't want to take on the heavy work, and you're like, all right, let me build a robot to do that. That sounds like a smart way to do it. All right.
And then I'm Dylan, co-founder and COO here at Renovate. My background is really on the investments. So I spent about 5 years at an early stage fund called SOSV. That makes about 150 investments a year into hardware and life sciences companies. And within SOSV, I focus specifically on hard technology. So robotics, automation, chemistry, etc. And, Andy and I met in February of 2022 when SOSV was the first investor into Renovate. So I first got excited about this idea from an investment perspective. And then, the excitement was brimming so much that I decided I had to quit to join the company. So here we are, a couple of years later.
So this thing we're hearing right now, it's probably one of the secret dreams of investors. It's like to find a company that you like so much that not only you're gonna, lead your fund to invest in it, but then you're just gonna quit and join it. I love that. How did that go, Dylan? How was it? So you saw the company, you saw Andy that was building as a solo founder, and you decided to join him. Did you work on the deal? What was that? What's the background behind you guys in the end teaming up?
Yeah. So maybe a little bit more context. like about my role and about like where my mind was at. SOSV makes a lot of investments also that overlap on planetary health and on climate. So one of the ways that I had always thought about hardware and one of the investment areas that I was always so excited about were hardware investments that made an impact on in climate as well. And I've always kind of thought of hardware and automation as one of the key components of solving the climate crisis. And that's kind of the mindset that I was in when I met a founder of another phenomenal climate robotics company named Unspun, was the founder that actually introduced me to Andy. And when he introduced me, he said, we tried to hire Andy like 3 times to join our company. This is Kevin Martin at Unspun. He said, we've tried to hire Andy like 3 times. He just won't join us. And now he's finally doing, his own thing. You guys have to take. So that's how I met Andy. And obviously that's such a positive signal to hear from, a company that has such a great mission and is doing such great work. And, when you open up the hood of the roofing industry, I think the thing that you realize first and foremost is that it's directly connected to the climate, right? It's a super climate driven industry. Roofs are the defense for our homes, for our infrastructure. They protect our buildings from the climate. And they're just incredibly necessary. And, it's just a fact that every time we build something, we're going to have to replace and repair and maintain that roof and that building. And in the case of roofs last only an average of every 20 years. So, there's just this constant cycle of needing to replace them. It's so intrinsically connected to climate and weather. It just felt like the perfect overlap. And that's always the area I've been so excited. So I would say that's at the core, like what pushed us to make the investment. I was definitely, one of the ones internally, on the investment team that was pushing to make it happen. And then, I guess secretly without telling people had also been thinking, Andy's a solo founder, maybe there'd be an opportunity to jump on and join him, which I successfully was able to convince him, that it was a good idea about 6 months after that.
And so what was because this is an interesting one. Andy, what was your thesis going into the SOSV pitches, right? What were you pitching? Was your vision for the company exactly what it is right now? And yeah, how are you, how did you make Dylan fall in love? And actually, guys, can I ask you to come closer to the camera or pull your laptop closer so that audio is better? Just a tip that I learned over a few episodes.
Yeah. So I mean, I came to Renovate like the real catalyst that led to Renovate was I bought a house in 2019 in Spokane, Washington. It was a 100-year-old house and it needed to have the roof replaced. And the process of doing that, the contractor or the insurance company was like kind of gouging me on the insurance rates until I could replace the roof. And at the same time, all the contractors were booked out for like 3 months. And so I was immediately frustrated. And then when they do show up to do the work, there's like all these people doing this really dangerous, really repetitive task. And the robotics side of my brain just starts turning. And it's like, if you could build a robot, you could do this, safer, faster, cheaper, basically solve multiple headaches with one piece of technology. And so that was really the pitch that I went to SOSV with. I think I had in the back of my mind that, that there was opportunity to expand into solar installation and some other construction trades as well, but that roof installation was going to be the main driver of like what we're doing the first few years. And we've stayed pretty true to that. We've definitely leaned in to the climate storytelling side of it, just because it is so true and it's such a climate driven industry. And then just the feedback from SOSV is that there's those are stories that people want to hear and get attracted to. So the pitch hasn't changed too much. The robot has changed a lot. Yeah.
No, yeah, I saw the first version of your robot that was way bigger and clunkier than than the one that I also saw on your test roof in your office,
Well,
which is pretty impressive.
yeah. Well, I'll add in. So before that, we actually had so we call our current robot Rufus, but our very first one we built, we call it Doofus,
Yeah.
because it was just a stupid concept. And so even before the one you saw, there was
Another.
there was another one. Yeah, but we've gone through basically 2 big iterations in the last year. So
I love it. I mean, I love the speed of development. You guys know this. And you have been, and I also want to do a small shout to the people at New Lab and how you guys have been able to find really good office space with, like, I don't know if everybody realizes you have a piece of roof in your office. And you have an outdoor roof in the atrium of your office, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a weird thing to find. And tell me, so where were you operating out of at the beginning, and then how when did that happen? You're moved to the Navy Yard.
yeah, so originally the company was founded in Seattle, Washington, so close to where I grew up. We were only there for just a few months, and when SWB made the investment, part of the request was that we move out and work with them out of their Newark, New Jersey office that they just opened. So we were actually the first company in the new building that opened in Newark. Yeah, Dylan, do you want to, maybe you can tell about New Lab?
Yeah. So like one of the, I think one of the exciting things about the place that we're at today is both like the infrastructure and also so we sit in the heart of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which is a 223-year-old shipbuilding facility. It was opened as an actual naval yard by the U.S. government in 1801 and has since been converted since the 1960s into, a 300-acre industrial and manufacturing site that's heavily subsidized by the city and the state of New York. So, the price per square foot that we pay for our facilities here is a fraction of what, other businesses in New York City pay. And the reason for that is that they want to attract good manufacturing jobs of the future, here to stay. So, we fit perfectly into that thesis, into their focus on manufacturing, industrialization, climate, robotics, et cetera. And then, in terms of New Lab, so New Lab is an organization within the Navy Yard. They have a physical office within the Navy Yard. They're one of our investors, so they are on our cap table, and then they're also, a great community partner for us. So they have physical infrastructure, they have facilities for, prototyping, developing, and testing hardware on site in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. They basically renovated 85,000 square foot building that used to be for building ships and is now for, building hardware. And they've renovated that and retrofitted it in mine. And yeah, as you said, Gabriel, you've been here, you've seen, we have both inside of our office, indoors, a roof that we built, and then outside in the kind of parking lot and atrium area of New Lab, an outdoor roof. So, and that was a result of a partnership between us and New Lab and the Navy Yard to so, I mean, it's been a great place for us to source talent, to build things.
I think one thing I would just add is that, when I was in Seattle and they were saying, come move out to New Jersey, New York area, I was not imagining that as a place where you could build like a hardware focused startup. It just felt like expensive and dense and challenging. And there definitely are challenges, but the things that have been huge for us is the communities at Hacks and at New Lab actually foster just really good environment for development. They bring in engineers, investors, prototyping. Yeah. And so it's been great for us. And we'll kind of see where it goes from here. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I loved that, and I love that the problems that New Lab, so the problems at the startup that are sitting there in New Lab with you guys are just as weird as your problems that they're trying to solve. Just many are as unsexy as the one that you're trying to solve, which we love. And I want to kind of double down on that one because it's super interesting. So few people. So I had never thought of roofing before sifting through your pitch deck for the first time.
Hey listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks and Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show.
And I was like, all right, whatever. And then I truly looked at, okay, these are the numbers of the roofing industry. And I kind of want to do this exercise live with you guys. And because there's a couple of metrics that are really easy to understand. So how many roofs are there in the US? Sorry, how many square feet of roofs are there in the US currently? Like an order of magnitude. Is it in the billions?
It's probably in the trillions, to be honest with you. Like in terms of total square feet of roofs in the US. So like the quick and easy numbers to understand it, there's, about 4.5 million or so roofs that we install every year in the US. Maybe the average square footage, we're talking about residential roofs here. So these are sloped roofs, which is the market within roofing that we're focused on. So you have to remember that there's basically an equally sized market of flat roofs that we don't focus on today, but we will in the future. So, there's about 4.5 million, of those roofs that are installed per year. And about 80% of that is replacement roofs. So these are people that, had their roof installed 20 years ago, 15 years ago, they need their roof replaced. And then maybe another 800,000 to 1 million of that is new. So these are roofs that are being built by home builders or people who are building, a brand new home from the ground up. And those roofs could be anywhere from 1,000 square feet up to, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30,000 square feet in size, depending obviously on the size of the home or the size of the building. So, if you think about that, what's happening in a year, there's about, let's say $60 billion or so that's changing hands every year. And that's at about a price of about $4 to $5 a square feet. So we're talking about, 12 billion square feet a year. Then if you think about over, a 20 or 25 year period, as those are getting replaced, now we're into the hundreds of billions, just talking about residential roofing. And then if you zoom out and think of commercial roofing, you potentially see a way to start to hit 1 trillion square feet of roofs in the US, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's just incredible. I think people don't realize that at all. And so building a robot to serve many millions of square feet of roofs, that was the initial, that's basically the goal. That's the thesis here. And you have been building your robot with a precise design philosophy in mind that takes into account what the contractor needs to do, the operator needs to do, current practices, safety, and a bunch of other things. Could you speak to what is the thesis that leads your design, the philosophy that leads your design every day? And it's going to lead your iteration number 3 and 4 and
Yeah. So the big things we look at are crew productivity and crew safety. And so like right now, just for those of the listeners that have never watched a roof get replaced, the way it happens is, usually, if it's a kind of average American suburban house, call it 2,000 or 3,000 square feet, there's going to be a crew of, 8 guys that show up that morning. For the first couple hours, they're just tearing off shingles. And then for an hour or so after that, they're doing the underlayment installation, kind of the metal work around the drip edge, the eaves and the sides of the roof planes. And then the shingle installation starts at about midday, and that carries them through the rest of the day. And so we looked at that whole process kind of holistically and said, all right, what are the parts where you get the most bang for your buck with automation, both in terms of productivity and safety? And we kind of quickly zeroed in on the shingle installation as the first point of attack. And then, our whole philosophy has been, you still have people on site, they're setting up the robot, they're doing that other part of the work, the tear off and the prep, but you can do that in parallel while the robot works. And so you can basically double the output of a crew, through the use of a robot doing the shingle installation side of things. And then you still have the people there to handle the edge cases, and like the more dexterous parts of the job. Yeah. And so that's kind of at a high level. Roofs are also a challenging environment for the robot. For like, any robot, they're at height, they're on a slope. And so you have to really consider, how is the robot going to get up there? How's it going to localize itself in that environment? And how's it going to be stable as it moves around that environment? And we took kind of a broad swath of brainstorms, but we zeroed in on this cable robot design. And the things that we liked about that are, one, that the cables tether the robot to the roof, just like a person is tethered to the roof. And so there's an inherent safety there, that it's not going to go out of control, fall down, and hit someone. The second thing we liked about the cable robot system is that the anchor points attach directly to the roof and adapt to different roof planes. So if you have, a trapezoidal shaped plane versus a rectangular plane, or if it's bigger or smaller or different aspect ratios, just the robot naturally adapts to that workspace. And so those two things really pushed us in that direction. And then we've been iterating through, basically just all the variations there to get to the most optimized factor. Yeah.
I love it. So the cable robot form factor, just to even make it more clear in the audience mind, is a robot that is held in place by 4 or n anchors, depending on how many vertices the area of the roof has, the shape of the roof has, and basically these anchor points are pulling or releasing tension to get the robot closer or actually freer to that direction. That's actually a super clever design. I've seen it in action. It's super interesting to see. And so the task that you're doing, and I'm kind of like zooming into the subsystem that we've looked together, is to place the shingles, align them within a certain tolerance, and then nailing the shingles to the roof. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. It's an extremely intelligent nail gun that does this with a lot of computer vision. I love it. And by the way, I wanted to call out this, just doing a step back, that just came into my mind. There has been a lot of activity around roofing in the US in the last few years, meaning a lot of consolidation between among roofing contractors. So the biggest roofing contractors are keeping acquire small businesses that have roots in underserved areas within their own business model, within the bigger player business model. And there's a lot of tech-enabled roll-ups that we're seeing pop up, where basically you can build a tech for which a roofing contractor can be faster and more efficient and have capture better demand and process it better. And then you can basically acquire businesses one by one, make them more efficient, and roll up all that profit into one single entity. How have you been perceiving the roofing market before we move to your own business model? How have you been perceiving those moves into the market? Because I know you're in contact with a ton of roofers, and you're actually superstars in the industry, because not many people actually try to build a solution for these contractors that is so tied to physical work. A lot of CRMs and ERPs, but not that many robots on our roofs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, what we've been seeing on the roofing market is exactly what you're saying. There's been a huge amount of consolidation. And, I think the number that's generally thrown out in the industry is that there's somewhere between 60 or 80,000 individual roofing contractors in the United States. So these are registered or licensed businesses to do roofing. And I think, the bet that started to take place within the industry is that, similar to other industries like, HVAC, plumbing, residing, you're seeing, private equity firms step in or private capital come in and consolidate these portfolios. And I think a lot of it has to do with technology. You're absolutely right. There's better tools in place, especially on, the more service side of the business. So whether that's, going out and calling customers or creating a pipeline or creating a CRM, closing a sale, those tools now exist today for those roofing businesses to go out and generate leads and close leads. And we're seeing, private equity firms utilize those pieces of technology, integrate them into roofers, and roll them up into larger platforms across the country. So I think, from our perspective, that's like we've actually seen it happen with the customers that we're working with, right? There's roofers that we met a year ago that were independent, independently owned. They've been around for 40, 50, 60 years. And they give us a call, 6 months after getting them. And they're like, hey, just a heads up, we've just been bought. We're now part of this larger group. And instead of $30 million a year of roofing, our larger group, now does $300 million a year. And we're a part of that. But it's not going to change, our interest in working with you or anything. So, I think it's interesting because it gives us a wedge into reaching an even bigger audience, right? When our customer consolidates and when their, revenue doubles or triples or is a part of a that's 10x size, we can create value for one customer within the node. It's much easier for us to scale horizontally to other customers within the node as well. That's very much, on our mind.
Yeah. And, just one other detail there is, that we talk about 60 to 80,000 contractors in the US. Most of those are small operations, like mom and pop type groups, one crew, just doing limited number of projects. And then like most of the consolidation is happening on the higher end, where it's people that are doing, 10, $20 million a year. They're running, 5 crews or 10 crews or, sometimes even more than that. And so there is kind of very different worlds in roofing. There's places for a lot of different players. But that's where the consolidation is happening, is at that big end.
And do you think so on the wired company side, do you think the willingness to sell, part of their business or majority of the business comes from, for example, some difficulties in finding net new labor, or the generational kind of like handoff not going through? What is it that it's missing for these businesses to operate, just, continue to operate in our generation? Because these are businesses that have been built by people that are, likely the age of our parents or our grandparents. So is it the generational link that's missing there, or am I missing something?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is driven by that generational handoff. But also these bigger contractors are pushing up against the limits of what's doable with like a regional based operation. And labor is definitely one of those main constraints. One of the things that we hear from these owners is that if we had more crews, we could do more work. They're like, it's really easy to scale up salespeople, to start knocking on more doors, start, closing more deals. But the hard part is having crews that you trust that are going to install a roof that's not going to leak. They're going to show up to work at the right time. And so they put a lot of value in managing those relationships with the labor. And that's really what constrains a lot of the big roofers.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a perfect market dynamic for value to accrue at the top and generate a few large players that will control a lot of the supply of roofing contracting services. So that's super interesting. Yes, it does raise the potential for ACV for a startup that services them. But I think this is a perfect segue into what I wanted to discuss. I think you were the two of the founders that I had the deepest conversation with when it comes to the idea maze of finding a business model for a robotics business in the construction space and in the renovation space. We spent hours in calls, but also in your office to try to model things. And I kind of want to give a little snippet, and I'd love for you guys to expand on, what your thoughts are. We can kind of take it from there. But the initial question was, hey, very simple. Should I rent out my robot to subcontractors that are already doing this job and can enhance their efficiency and they will pay me a monthly lease? Or should I hire a crew, get licensed as subcontractor, and go get jobs and have the lowest price on the market, most likely, or at least the same price of market standard, and reap better margins because I'm using less labor. And also from the get-go, I wouldn't be managing things like a legacy shop. I would probably be top of class in terms of financial management of my projects. So this is like the big fork, the big the big conundrum. And so what was your idea maze? Can you walk me through like what in a time sequence, what were you thinking at certain points of time and where did you land?
Yeah, I think I don't know that that there's been a huge amount of change over the life of the company. But what's always been super clear to us in the short term is that we're going to need to go out and get projects. The reason why that we think that's important is that anyone that's ever built a robot knows that not everything goes perfectly, especially in the early days. And so we feel like it's important to have our own people on site who know how to troubleshoot problems, who are empowered to like make those solutions, and are they're operating the robot, making sure that it's working. The flip side of that would be, if you leased it to someone, then if that robot's not performing exactly how they think, or if it's hard to use, you're going to be met with frustration and bad reviews. And so you want to be really careful before you make that handoff to like an external user. And so it's always been clear to us that at least in the early stage, we're going to be a subcontractor installing jobs ourselves. I think like where there's been more development is like when we imagine, what does Renovate look like as a big company? The downside to scaling the subcontracting model is that it's operationally intense. You need, operations in multiple cities all across the country. Every one of those places needs people, robot operators, maintenance crews, trucks. And so there's just real like capital cost and operational cost associated with that. And so, what looks better like in those areas is like the leasing model, where you're really just focused on building a robot, training people on how to use it, and getting those distributed across the country. But I think it's not super clear cut still on exactly when you would make a change or if you would make a change. And so we're still working through a lot of those discussions. And I think what we feel comfortable with is that we can scale the subcontracting as long as we want to, or there's also good business on leasing. And so we feel empowered that there's multiple options.
Yeah. Is there one of the two of you that is more leaning towards one side as opposed to the other? Do you guys fight over this?
Yeah. I mean, I think we definitely see like merit in all of the options. And I think like what is unique about the place and time that we're at in history is that like the shape of businesses is changing as a result of the technology stack changing. And I think, if you think about the capital stack that existed, for a majority of the startup world, which was predominantly dominated by software for the last 20 years, like that capital stack looked quite similar for a lot of companies. And I think as you're starting to see huge advancements in robotics and machine vision and AI and more hardware in more, atoms rather than bits type companies, you're also seeing more development and more resources pop up to support those different shapes of companies. So whether that's, accessing debt for your manufacturing or for building your products, or for scaling your business, like these companies can take different shapes and sizes. And I think like it's even a necessity, right? It's like for us to solve a lot of these problems, the companies can't look like they always have because they're different problems. So I think like that's what gives us a lot of confidence about this as well, is that like, well, the plan that we've got has a lot of great advantages to it. As Andy said, one is that we get to be operating much faster. So we get to be on job sites today, installing projects today, testing our technology today and improving our robot today. But, let's say 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, maybe we've created a huge amount of value as a subcontractor, but at the same time, our technology has gotten so much better that maybe at that point we feel comfortable enough that we could shift. And I think the other great thing about it is that roofing is incredibly regional as well, right? And that you can utilize some of these different models potentially in different geographies. So if you wanted to scale up operations as a subcontractor in one, region, there's no reason why you couldn't do that. And then when the time is right, also turn around and start, leasing in a different geography or scaling different business models in different geographies.
Because the licenses themselves are tied to a specific geography. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, and because the roofs are there, right? It's physical work, it's construction work. So you have to co-locate. The business has to be co-located with where the work is.
Yeah, I think, two other points I would add is that, one, we also just want to be making sure that we're serving what our customers want. And so roofing contractors today are limited by the crews that they have. And so if we can be efficient, scalable labor source for them, then like that's going to be a hugely valuable business. The other thing I was going to point out is that, there's, like Dylan was saying, there's huge opportunity to be creative with the business models, and even things like you could simulate like a leasing business model internally, like where you have regional franchises who are operating the subcontracting projects and paying monthly fees to use the robots back to the parent company. And so we're really casting a broad view right now and trying to think like what's the best structure for our company.
Okay. Super interesting. I think this is a key. This is a prime example, just because of the size of the market and the features of the market, of the intricacy of the IDMAs for business models. It's like you're gonna have to change it as you go. Every iteration of the robot, every iteration of customer feedback, every step forward in terms of performance that you've reached, you have optionality. It gives you optionality to change the way you operate and make it just make more money for the overall, for the biggest, for the bigger entity. And I'm really interested in, so right now you have I'd love to speak on where you stand. So I know you've been on roofs, so this is super cool. You've been on roofs outside. You've done some testing. What have you learned from being on the first outdoor roofs in real world condition? What were your biggest delta learnings? That's how I would call them, between your testing roofs and new lab and the first roofs. Also, where did you do this? Was that New Jersey? Was it New York City?
Yep, it was in New Jersey,
Okay.
kind of the northern end of New Jersey. I think the biggest thing we learned on the first project was just that we had a lot to improve on the on-site logistics. So like we had never packed up our robot, put it in a truck, showed up, put it on a roof, and we spent a lot of time just moving things around, getting it set up. Like, oh, where would that tool? It's like, oh, and so when we're reviewing that day, it's like, oh, like half of the time that we were on the roof, we weren't even replacing shingle. And so that was like, one big learning just right off the bat. And then we're able to, basically cut that time, to like a third of the setup time on the second project. Similarly, like the other thing that we haven't recreated super well is just the lighting conditions of being outside in the real world. And so the way our system works is we use machine vision looking down at the roof. So it looks at where the last shingles were placed, and then it updates the robot positioning to guarantee the next shingle goes in the right spot. And especially on the second project we did, it was a super bright, sunny day. There were all these trees that were casting harsh shadows onto the roof, and the vision system was not getting data out of it that was meaningful to us. And so we've invested in basically more resources internally to build out bigger data sets with more lighting conditions and do some more data augmentation as well. So there's learnings both operationally and technology wise. Yeah.
And what has it been the biggest validation? So what have you said? Aha, we actually saw this coming. Here it is. No, this is not going to stop us.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say like the thing that's working, that's like exciting, is that like it's working, right? It's like, you know, have any critical errors, right? It's like, oh, you can actually plug it in to the house. You know, like there were all of these unknowns that, you know, you can spitball, but you don't know until they're sure. And it's like, oh, is the homeowner going to freak out? Are people going to stop and stare? Is it going to be weird? Is it going to distract the crew? Or like, you know, are we going to have any critical failures? And I would say that just like, you know, it's working. And like that's just the exciting part, is it's like, it's super clear what we need to improve. And it's the things that we're already focused on improving. And it's the things that I'm sure you, Gabriel, could guess, you know, knowing what you know about us. And it's like, all right, continuing to collect more data, improve our data sets, install more accurately, continuing to, you know, refine our control systems and our hardware to install faster and to move faster around the roof and to process data faster, et cetera. So, and like, even as Andy said, right, like the setup time, right, like from, you know, we're doing a third of the setup time that we did on the first project on the second project. And like, we're seeing, I would say, like similar improvements in other. So like, what's exciting is that there's just big areas where we can improve, and like making those improvements isn't going to take years. It's going to take like weeks or months. And then we're already able to do that. And then we're in a testing environment with customers who want to help us do it, right? So like, we're a few weeks away again from, you know, a third project where we'll be on site rolling in even more features, trying to hit even better. So like, we're in that exciting part of the growth where like we really are compounding. And it's in all the areas that we know and are continuing to push resources towards.
And it's super interesting also to look at, when we look at real world deployment, a big factor is the human factor. And going back to what I was saying at the very beginning, you know, at this moment we are set on, you know, playing the subcontractor's role. But as we said before, that's going to probably change in the future if we realize there's more gains to be made. Now, my question to you guys is, how are you guys thinking about the human factor in roofing installations? In any case, it's going to be a human that is going to operate it at a you know, sizable scale. You will not have met the human that is installing shingles with your robot, right? So how are you thinking about, you can call it a training program, you can call it user interface, but like the interface between the robot and the human and the remaining members of the crew? What's your design philosophy around that? Because I know that at the beginning, roboticists want to build something that they can operate. Doesn't matter that others can't. Like, you know, as long as my robotics engineer can, you know, log all the commands, get for difficult things to, you know, light up, it's going to work. That's not enough.
Yep.
I feel like on the design side, the thing that I've seen as the non-engineer on the team that I've been the most excited about is the things that we've borrowed from traditional roofing and that we're incorporating into how the product is used. So for example, the anchoring on the right, roofers today already go up onto the roof and they mount an anchor in order to tie off from, right? And our anchoring system borrows from a lot of those principles. You go up onto the roof and you mount an anchor and you tie off from there. You know, we haven't fully implemented this yet, but the way that you get the robot on the roof will borrow from those similar principles. So today, roofers use what's called a ladder lift, basically a ladder that has a winch on it and a platform, and you set materials on top of it, and the winch pulls the materials on the ladder. You know, we're borrowing from that same ladder lift design to build a tool that looks and feels familiar to them that they can put the robot on and gets the robot onto the roof. And you know, we've tried to think about that kind of at every step, you know, even when it comes to like reloading the robot, right? Like, okay, you're unpackaging the robot and pulling the shingles apart. That's already a task that humans are doing. So it's not a big deal if the robot needs to be loaded in that way, because today a roofer is, you know, unpackaging shingles, pulling them apart, you know, and placing. So, and then there's all of these things that we don't want the human to ever think about, right? Like, we're working towards a world where there's full autonomy and where the robot can place shingles on the roof without, you know, a human having to intervene. Obviously there's to be done to get to to that full autonomy and to no downtime. But yeah, I feel like, we're trying to borrow as much from those intuitive areas that roofers already kind of understand. And then all the things that we don't want them to ever think about, we try to throw at software and at hardware.
But right now we're definitely in the mode where there's only about one person in the world that can run our robot, and it's our controls engineer. Yeah.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll break out of that in the next 2 to 3 months. Yeah.
Okay.
The way we're thinking about that is we actually are going to hire a technician whose job is going to be to run the robot. And I think it's important, you just need to force that to happen. And so the people that are developing the software are not the people running it. And that just forces this developer user relationship. And so I think first we'll do that internally, and then it'll start to roll out broader.
I love the way that this is evolving. So you're discovering piece by piece what's needed to make this happen at scale. And the scale is so large, it's actually really difficult to imagine. When I was talking to you guys, I was actually modeling, hey, how many cities do we have to be in to, just become the best and the biggest roofing contractor in the US? And the scale at which this can happen, if it's done, in the highest efficiency way, with the lowest labor cost, with, CapEx that gets amortized over not that many projects, etc., looks like an empire. It looks like a subcontracting empire or a leasing empire, whatever that is, where basically Renovate Robotics becomes the standard for replacing shingles on asphalt roofs in the US, which is a humongous vision that, if said to someone that's not very, hasn't really looked into the industry, are like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like I did with the stage of the pitch. But then, it's really interesting once you dive into it. And I guess I have one last thing that I wanted to talk to you about before kind of asking you for a final thought for other founders, which is where do you see the biggest problem in team building for making this happen, right? So what's the biggest bottleneck? I'm sure you're a very good ecosystem, but there's always a part of the team that needs to grow faster or that needs better talent, and it's really hard to find people in that area. And it can be at the highest level of like people that have to manage engineers, or at the lowest level at the technician that has to operate a robot. Where do you see the biggest challenge in human resources play?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll go first, so I'll see what Dylan says as well. But I mean, I think one of the big challenges for us and for all like hardware companies is that for the first 6 months, it's like the hardware is the limiting factor. But then as soon as the hardware is built, then the like control system and software becomes the limiting factor. And then like as soon as that's working, then the data that you have is the limiting factor. And so you kind of go through these cycles where you can't afford to hire a team of 12 people. And so you have to figure out what are the right 5 people that are adaptable enough to make progress through all of these cycles. And I think that's been like one of the biggest challenges for us, but it's also something that we've made some good hires, and people, even like a guy, one of our guys, James, we brought him in as a mechanical engineer, and then he's basically leading a big chunk of our software development at this point. And so just finding people that are adaptable.
No, I mean, I would totally agree with you. And I think like there's no right answer for hardware companies. There's only trade-offs, and it's about what's the right trade-off for the progress that you need to make, depending on what your goal is, whether it's to sell the next job, to sell the next robot, to raise the next round, right? There's all these stages that you're going through. So for us, like, I feel like the trade-off we've tried to optimize for is getting on a roof as quickly as possible and creating value for our customers, as quickly as possible. And what that's meant, as Andy said, is like bringing in people that can juggle those cycles well, being able to both put a mechanical engineering hat on, but then turn around and also, design the architecture for the control system and help with the vision pipeline for the software and all of these different areas.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot of competencies that come into play when building this, and it's funny because they are on different levels. They're on the technological level, software, hardware, manufacturing. Once you scale that up, and that's my last question. And then you have the entire operation of the business, which is completely absent in software, completely absent in some hardware companies that are not really doing what we're doing, which is services or tech for services. And that's another really difficult area to hire on. But going back to the bottom of the list of the first part of the area of technology, there's manufacturing. And I think it was one of my first questions to you guys. And really, we iterated a lot on this one. Um, I'm really curious. I mean, I'm sure the audience will be on how how have you been thinking about manufacturing of the robot? So you have right now the first prototypes. These are really custom built, meaning there's a lot of iterations that go into. They have a lot of scars, right? They've had a lot of surgery, but then you'll need to ship out the ready-made product. How have you thought about building a resilient manufacturing base right now from the bill of material that you've been tinkering with in the prototyping phases?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is one of those like big engineering trade-off decisions, and like we've made decisions early on that our priority was going to be building one robot that works before we before we start to scale up. I think something that happens is like if you scale up before the hardware is mature, then you just end up scaling your hardware problems, and yeah, and so we right now most of our effort has gone to building that one. But there's the caveat there is that, I come from a world where you're building new machinery that's expected to do commercial work right away. And so I bring this, mindset of how do you do things economically that's still able to be iterated on. And then like Dylan spent tons of time in Shenzhen and, is a huge resource for us as we start to look towards cheaper manufacturing options. And so we've got, the skeleton there to build around, but definitely all the focus so far has been make one that works. Yeah.
I mean, I was just gonna say on the design side as well, there's like going maybe even a layer deeper into hardware. Like I feel like what we've been good at is kind of thinking about subsystems as modular components as well. So our product, we've moved away from like a behemoth product, but thinking about, all right, how can we continue to iterate and swap out subsystems that are improved or have cheaper components or have less hardware and throw more at software? Because we have a few different subsystems on the robot, whether it's, the end effector or the part that's moving around the roof or the anchors and winches, et cetera. So I think like that's another way that we're thinking about it is, all right, like modularizing those components, creating subsystems that basically could be individual products that could be sourced and manufactured, in one place rather than another. And then also thinking about, all right, how do you, like one of the other things that's important is like, just how do you do less manufacturing? One of the best ways to do manufacturing is to do less of it, right? It's like, right, how do you get as much hardware out of the system as you can? Where we started from, as Andy said, is all right, how do we make a robot that works? And where we're headed towards is how do we make the most, bare bones version of that, that's scalable, that's effective, that has, high uptime, low downtime, that's manufacturable, that has components that are sourced, et cetera.
The other thing I would add is there's kind of a series of build versus buy decisions. And early on, when you're a small team, we try to prioritize making sure that our engineers were working on the new technology that we're developing. And so we bought, more expensive motor drives and, industrial control systems because we didn't want people sitting there writing low level, firmware for electronics. We wanted them, developing features for a roofing robot. But the time will come where to decost the robot, you go towards cheaper systems where you have to do a little bit more of that programming yourself. And so, and so we're also have been conscious about, we're going to buy this functionality early on. and then down the road we'll build it ourselves. Yeah.
I love the mentality. I think a lot of what we're trying to, my goal with BitBuilders in general is to get the audience aware of what it takes to build hard things, and like robots are, kind of like the focus of hard things of this podcast. But this is a super key point that Andy just raised: is you can build the same thing with two different approaches. You can embed everything in one chip, few components that you have really specifically manufactured or found and integrated. But that's kind of like the final outcome. But the beginning, you need to be able to flexibly iterate, and so you want those components to operate independently. You can swap them out and modularly, as Dylan was saying, and you can basically make the robot better until you think that marginal improvement becomes useless. Once the marginal improvement becomes useless, you start printing PCBs, writing custom firmware, buying components. They're like, you can buy them in bulk. Like, oh my God, I finally decided what motor I want. And that really drives down your BOM costs. And I think what we're seeing in hardware startups a lot more is, well, utilization of off-the-shelf components for sure. I think we're seeing less and less over time, people that are doing machining of specific components. Like, there's only maybe a few structural parts of the frame that are done in a certain way. But we're seeing that mentality, and that is the mentality that grew software. It's actually the mentality that grew through GitHub and other repos. Like, you take pieces of things, you modulate them together, you make them run. Does it work? No. Swap a piece, put that back in, repeat. And so this iteration cycle needs to come to hardware faster. If we want, robotics to scale, I think now it's the time. A lot of things, even on the software side, are swappable. You can swap computer vision models, running them on the same computer in a robot. So I think a lot of it has, is been developed right now, and a lot of it has been used by new teams to generate new value. And I think the bad thing for incumbents is that their design process is closely tied to the old way of doing hardware. And so a lot of the people that are building robotics to replace existing industrial automation are actually going to be at a less of a technical debt, less of a disadvantage going into these processes. And I mean, we love that because, it makes opportunity for the entire ecosystem to grow. And I'd love to ask you like one final question that I try to ask to every single founder and non-founder that comes to the podcast. You can answer separately, definitely. What is the advice that you'd give to a first-time robotics or construction tech or simply hardware founder that's approaching a really hard problem to build? And you can take it one at a time.
Yeah,
I have an answer. Yeah. I think like, it's going to be hard, but it's really going to be hard. And I think it's really important to surround yourself with people who understand. Like, I think, you want to make sure, whether it's you're a co-founder or you're a first hire or you're a first investor, like, you need to like actually really strategically think about who those people are and that they're really well aligned with you on, the next 10, 15 years of what you're trying to build. So I feel like that's my advice, right? Is that like those first people are actually super crucial, and they need to be aware of the challenge and complexity of what we're trying to do, because it's different than most of what other people are.
Yeah. I think like it's funny, we actually had an intern that we hired, who has now gone on to start his own robotics company. And so I'm just thinking of like, what have been the things that I've talked to him about? Yeah. And there's just so many moving pieces. But I think what's important, like what I think about is the milestones, and, like with the resources you have, how can you show that you're making progress? And, obviously in the early days, like for most founders, like resources are more scarce. And so you have to be pretty scrappy. But then as resources go up, it's like you still want to work in these like little milestone driven sprints, and give yourself iteration cycles, because what you don't want to do is go into like a black box and emerge, a year later only to realize that you drastically overlooked something. And so, and so I feel like those little milestones, whether they're business, like development milestones or product development milestones, like I feel like that would be the advice I'd give.
Okay. Don't compartmentalize. Yeah. Keep it, keep a wide eye.
Yeah.
I love the conversation, guys, as always. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I mean, I hope we can do a part 2 soon. Maybe when you launch a wider market, move or a raise, or just you guys want to chat with me. That's just gonna be easy to do. You can just shoot me a message. And thank you so much for your time. I wish you the best and good luck with Rufus. I know he's gonna go on to do great things.
Thanks, Gabriel. Have a good one.